What's up, everybody? And welcome to What's in Your Glass. I'm your host, Carmelo Anthony, as you know. Before we get going, though, let's first welcome today's guest. You know him as the New York Times bestselling author, uh, combat veteran, and entrepreneur. I don't want to miss. I don't want to miss nothing. I don't want to skip nothing. He formerly served as the CEO of the Robinhood Foundation, an organization that targets poverty in New York City. And most recently, earlier this summer, he announced his candidacy for governor of Maryland. So, please welcome to the show my brother, Mr. Wes Moore.
Hello,
Cheers, Mr. Wes Moore. Absolutely. No, we
Good to
usually
see
have
you.
we usually have people clapping in the background and all of that, but that's post production. Don't worry about that. Nah, but on today's show, man, I like to start off with I want to know what my guest is drinking. So what are you drinking right now? What's in your glass?
Well, what is in my glass is Elk Run. It's a cab. It's actually a cab from here in Frederick, Maryland. So
Oh
Frederick,
wow,
Maryland, yes. So for those who don't know, Maryland actually has quite a few vineyards,
absolutely.
and actually some very good vineyards. And so Frederick is over in Western Maryland. It's only about an hour, a little less away from your hometown of Baltimore. And it's a good cab. It's a good cab. So
I have to try that. I got to try that.
we're gonna send you some, Melo. We're gonna send you some.
I need that. I'm drinking a white wine today. Little Merceau, 2017. I usually don't do the white,
Nice.
but I figure, look, I'm with the next governor of Maryland. I might as well do some, I need to celebrate with him. So cheers, my brother.
Cheers, brother. It's great to be with
Cheers.
you always.
Likewise.
Always.
Wes, let's get to it. I want to start by taking it all the way back because similar and much like myself, you grew up in both Maryland and New York.
Yeah.
What was your childhood like, kind of growing up in those two places?
You know, I mean, for like a lot of us, we end up moving around a lot, and it's there's really two reasons why kids oftentimes move, right? It's opportunity or it's tragedy, and it usually falls into one of those two buckets, right? And I think about it in my life where I have had the chance to live in both Maryland and New York, and both of those two things were the motivation at times. Where I was born down in Maryland, and I spent the first 4 years of my life, really 5 years of my life down here. But when I was 4 years old, I watched my dad die in front of me.
Wow.
He had a treatable virus, but when he went to the hospital, his clothes were disheveled and he was unshaven, and there was assumptions that he didn't have insurance. And when my mom came to the hospital to check on him, they asked her questions like, "Is he prone to exaggeration?" And he was asked to leave the hospital. And they told him that, but if it gets worse, just come back. Go home, get some rest. But if it gets worse, it comes back. 5 hours, and 5 hours later, he died in front of me. And so my mother then became a widow with three children she was going to raise on her own. And that was not the life that she had expected or prepared for. And so she had a really difficult time. We didn't live in a good neighborhood. And she needed help. So she called my grandparents. My grandfather was a minister in the South Bronx, and my grandmother was a school teacher. And it was tragedy that forced us to move up to the Bronx and go live with my grandparents. And again, the neighborhood that I lived up in the Bronx in New York wasn't a great neighborhood. And I found myself getting to a lot of trouble, and to the point where literally I was 11 years old when I first felt handcuffs on my wrists up in New York. But when I was 14, my mom got a job. And that was the first job that actually gave her benefits. It was the first job that allowed her to work one job instead of multiple jobs, the first job that gave her reliable hours. And it was that job that then moved us back from New York back down to Maryland. That job was at a place called the Annie E. Casey Foundation, which is in Baltimore. And so
Absolutely.
then it was an opportunity that then moved us back. So you know, for so many of us, for so many of our kids, right? It's tragedy or opportunity that causes the moves. And I think for most of my life and for much of my childhood, I saw how both of those two things reared their head to show how we kept on having different places that we called home.
That's and I mean, you know, that story is very similar to my stories. You know, leaving New York and growing up and going to Baltimore, thinking that things would be a lot different in Baltimore. It actually was worse. It actually was
That's
worse.
right.
But you don't know that because everybody's going through the same thing. Everybody's
Right.
dealing with the same issues. So I didn't know it was worse. I actually loved it. I fell in love with it. Became who I am, and I became, a product of that environment.
Yeah.
So I understand. I understand, two sides of how you think when you say you was growing up in there.
Yeah.
I want to talk about a little bit at your time at Valley Forge Military Academy, and more specifically the events leading up to you going there. Like something that stuck out to me was I was thinking about this interview. Was when you said I think it was a People article from 2017. You said at some point what I began to understand is that my life had a relevance to someone other than just me.
Yes.
I want to make sure I got that right. Did I quote
You
that
got
right?
that right. You got that right.
That really hit me, and I talk about this in my book as well.
That's right.
What was the process like for you, or until you were able to understand that it wasn't just about you? Like, when was that moment that clicked?
Yeah. And by the way, let me just say, I'd be remiss to say, I was so honored to get a chance to read an advanced copy of this book.
I appreciate that.
I've been telling everybody who will listen, just wait until this book drops because your book is special, man. Your
Thank
book
you,
is
my
special,
brother.
and I'm excited for the world just to see how special this story is. So
I
so
appreciate
big ups
that.
and well done, man. Well
Absolutely.
done.
Thank you.
You know, and honestly, I think it was one of these things when that it's that journey into manhood where I think when people say, well, what is the definition of manhood to me? And I felt like it was always part of a challenge for me where I felt like people always had different interpretations, right? If you talk to 12 different young men and you said, well, what does it mean to be a man? You might give 12 different answers, right? But for me, it oftentimes came back to this idea of at what point are you responsible for something bigger than yourself? At what point do you actually take responsibility for the actions of others as well? So then it's not just about what you do, but it's about what you influence. And I remember for me, military school was a big deal because I got sent there when I was 13. I had a mandatory year, and my mother had been threatening me with going there since I was 8. And every year she was like, if you don't get it together, I'm gonna send you to military school. I'm like, I'm gonna work harder. And when I was 9, she started giving me brochures to show me she wasn't playing around. So I look at the brochures, and her threats kept coming, but she never sent me. But she wasn't not sending me because she makes empty promises. Like my mother does not make empty promises.
Right.
She wasn't sending me because she couldn't afford it. And finally, when I was 13, she was literally taking collections from people in her church and asking them, could they help out? And she was going to be thousands of dollars short again. So she thought this would be another year that she couldn't do it. And unbeknownst to me at the time, my grandparents ended up taking money out of their home. They ended up doing a refi of their home and taking the money out and giving it to my mom. And they lived in this little small home in the Bronx. But they figured out a way to make it that it was worth enough that they could actually give me a chance to have a chance. And it actually really hits me still when I even think about it, because it's like when you have people who believe in you like that, I mean, it's a big deal.
There's no better feeling than that.
Nothing. And so I go to this military school, and I hated every minute of it. I literally ran away 5 times in the first 4 days at the school. I mean, I couldn't stand that place, anything about it. But there was something about that place that just gave me a different understanding of what it meant to be relevant. And honestly, that thing was leadership. Where when people say, well, yeah, wasn't it about that they gave you discipline, or they woke you up early, or they made you do push-ups? Yes, they woke up early. Yes, you did push-ups. All that was real, right? But that wasn't the secret sauce, right? What happened was very early in the process, they put you in charge of something. And it starts off something small, And then you have this graduated responsibility, right? And every single year you're responsible for something bigger than yourself, right? And you start off with a squad, then you get a platoon, then you get a company, then you get a battalion. And I fell in love with that, right? I fell in love with the desire to have the ball in my hands in the fourth quarter.
Absolutely.
I fell in love with the idea that you had a whole team that was looking at you for guidance, and you had to provide it. You had to be the example. You had to set the tone. And so that was the thing that I think gave me something that I don't think I was getting from other places. Was it really was this ability to demand leadership and to step into it and to be excited about it, because it was something that I fed off of and I yearned for.
So did you feel like you were forced to learn that?
Yeah.
Or it just happened once you got there, it happened naturally?
Well, I think what they do is they want to put you in charge of something small, and then they want to watch you grow. Right. And they want to teach you the importance of it. So, for example, if we're in the same company, right, and they're like, all right, Anthony, you're now going to be a team leader in this squad, and I'm a member of your team, and you see me, drinking a bottle of water or whatever like that, and I throw the bottle of water on the ground, you're not going to be like, oh, that's okay. You can be like, hey, Moore, you come and scoop me up, because you're like, hey, I'm not going to get in trouble because you can't find a trash can.
Absolutely.
And they notice that, right? They're like, it's accountability, right? And they notice that, like, all right, Anthony's on his thing. And so now they're like, okay, Anthony, now you're a squad leader. Now you're in charge of 5 people. And let's say I'm in your squad, and let's say I show up 5 minutes late for class. They're not going to walk up to me and say, Moore, why are you late? They're going to walk up to me and say, Moore, who's your squad leader? And they're going to come find you. And they're going to be like, Anthony, Moore was 5 minutes late for my class today. Why? Well, you need to have an answer, because you're in charge. And so there's this responsibility that you now have, that you're like, all right, you know what, Moore, you're going to be 5 minutes early for class tomorrow. I'm not going to get in trouble.
10 minutes. 10 minutes early.
10 minutes early. You know what I mean? But it's like, but there's this responsibility that you feel, and that they provide the platform for. But then the natural nature is we grow into it. And then we find ourselves that it's not just when we sit in the seats, that these are the seats that we're ready for, that these are the seats that were made for us. And that's why I think it gives us the opportunity to grow in that environment.
So you grew, and you had to be a leader because of the consequences. And it was coming back on you.
It was coming back. And the reality is that, there's so many other systems within our society to do the same thing. Right. You know what I mean? Like, it's interesting, because when you look at basic codes that, people live in and exist in, whether you're talking about in neighborhoods and streets, or whether you're talking about Fortune 500 companies or military organizations, they're the same codes. It's the same graduated sense of responsibility that are provided, that people walk into. And so I just feel like in many ways, I got something that was coming my way in the first place, but it just gave me a different environment to let it flourish.
Absolutely. So following military academy, you ended up at I think Johns Hopkins, after which you studied in London as a Rhodes Scholar. Like you was just doing your thing. You was just going crazy. How do you go from like having issues in school to becoming, Rhodes Scholar? Like how does that happen? I need to know the mindset of how that happened.
Honestly, you want to know how it happened? I'm gonna show you how it happened. This is how it happened.
Oh wow!
I don't know if you can see that.
I can see that.
That's in fact, you probably know who it is, but for everybody else, that's a guy named Kurt Schmoke.
Absolutely.
Kurt Schmoke is the former mayor of Baltimore City. And how it happened was that I was a student in Baltimore, and I got an internship with the mayor of Baltimore.
Right.
And during my second internship with the mayor of Baltimore, this was the last day of my internship with him. And what was amazing was that, so Kurt Schmoke was not the type of guy that had like paparazzi following him around or anything like that. I mean, he wasn't that type of mayor.
Not at all.
At all, right? But it just so happened that on the last day of my internship with him, I was in his office, and the City Hall photographer happened to be in there. And he said to me, have you ever heard of the Rhodes Scholarship? And I said, I'd heard of it because I knew he was a Rhodes Scholar. And he's like, let me show you something. And he goes over, and as you see in the picture, he goes over to his wall and he's pointing to something. That thing he's pointing at is the picture of his Rhodes Scholarship class. And it was during that meeting that he told me, he's like, I want you to apply for the Rhodes Scholarship. And I went back and I did my research and I applied for the Rhodes Scholarship. And then months after that conversation, I was named a Rhodes Scholar.
Wow.
And it's one of these things where not often do some of the most important moments in your life get caught on camera. That was one of those moments where one of the most important moments in my life got caught on camera, because that was when he told me about an opportunity that would later on change my life. Because, I did not, it exposed me to a world that I didn't even know existed. It exposed me to doors that I didn't even know, how to open doors that I didn't even know were out there. Introduced me to people that I had no idea that I'd ever get a chance to be, in their presence, that would actually know my name. So it's like, I think about that. And the reason I keep that picture on my desk is I think it just goes and shows the importance of who are those people in our life who at the right moments and at the right times change the trajectory of our life without even realizing it, whether it's a coach, whether it's a minister, whether it's a family member, whoever it is, a teacher. But that was one of those moments when he looked at me and he said, here's this kid coming up in Baltimore. But I want to tell him about something that helped to change my life, and now I think can help change his. And that's exactly what he did.
Wow. And big shout out to the mayor too, because I was in Baltimore when he was the mayor, so I knew what was going on.
And he had a tough go. He had a tough go.
He was a tough one. He was a tough one. It's crazy because he had on McCullough Street in McMecken. It was supposedly that was his house, so he was living right there in the middle of the hood, right next to us. So it was just good to be able to touch and see him get up every morning while we walking to school, he going to work. So that's what made it, he was a big factor, a big key in our community, talking about Baltimore. So
that's right.
Big shout out to the mayor for that.
Yes.
What's in Your Glass is brought to you by our friends at Wine Access. You've heard us talk about them before. They are great for any wine lover out there. The more I experience and understand wine, the more I love it. I've been lucky to have sommeliers to tap into, and that's why I'm so excited to be partnering with Wine Access. Wine Access team of experts offer the best of the best. It's like getting a recommendation with every bottle. Everyone's wine journey is unique, and Wine Access can help you get to your destination. I've been so impressed by every bottle I've tried from Wine Access. It's so clear that they take time curating their selection, and that is very important to me. I cannot recommend Wine Access enough. With Wine Access, you don't have to be a wine expert to find something you'll love. Their team tastes over 20,000 bottles a year, so those available on the site have been carefully curated by some of the world's most credentialed wine experts. Plus, the Wine Access team's personnel connections with winemakers around the world give them and us access to the most exclusive wines. So whether you're looking for a $15 bottle or a $200 bottle, Wine Access has something for you. And if you aren't impressed, Wine Access will credit that bottle. How great is that? I want you to discover your new favorite wine with Wine Access. So I put together a special offer for my listeners, 20% off your first purchase. Just go to wineaccess.com/glass. Order today at wineaccess.com/glass. What things along your path though, right? That now that you can look back on just that experience, like what are some of the positives, even though like they may have been negatives at the time because maybe you knew or maybe you didn't know? Like you said, you spoke about the Rhodes Scholar. You understood it, but you didn't know all of that came with that.
Yeah.
So what are some of the positives, even though that they may have been negatives at the time?
I got to tell you, man, I think it was also around that time that I realized that I was going to devote my life to public service. That I was going to devote my life to being a voice, to trying to be able to address so many of the challenges that we just continue to see, in our lives and in our environments and our circumstances. Because I looked at my life and I knew that I was such a statistical anomaly. I was such an exception from so many of the other kids that we're coming up with, where you look at your life where you're like, you're such an exception from so many of the kids that you came up with.
Right.
And there's a real discomfort in that exceptionality, right? There's a discomfort in the fact that why we as a society are comfortable with the idea that some make it, but most don't, that some can pull out, but so many have no shot, have no pathway. And I think that it was one of these things where I found myself really humbled and thankful and blessed for the fact that I was now seeing things that my family never even knew to tell me about. And at the same time, I found myself feeling complicit, where I found myself feeling that if I am not spending my time and my energy and my focus trying to change those dynamics, then it's almost like the blessing was spoiled on me. Like it should have been given to somebody else if you're just going to focus on how this benefits me. And so I think it really was in that time and in that moment where, I was trying to figure it out professionally. I was trying to figure out what else to do. I found myself in these new environments, in these new rooms with very head spinning and all this kind of stuff. But the thing that actually rooted me, the only thing that felt right, the only thing that felt comfortable was when I got back to the idea of saying and looking back and talking to friends, talking to family, going back to old neighbors and saying, so what is it that we're supposed to do that can actually change destinies of people? And where it's not the exception, right? I mean, I remember, I think oftentimes of this story of, kind of like the starfish. And that story of the kid who's on the beach, picks a starfish, throws starfish in water, and the guy looks at the kid and there's these thousands of starfish on the beach. And the guy looks at the kid and is like, do you really think you're making a difference? And the kid reaches down and picks up a starfish and throws a starfish back in the water. And he says, I did to that one. And it's right. And it's a beautiful story, right? It's a story about our personal impact on individuals. But at some point, should we not ask the question, but why are there thousands of starfish on the beach? At some point, we have to ask that question too, and not just be satisfied with picking up the one starfish and throwing the starfish back in the water and feeling like we've made our contribution for the day.
So it's deeper than that.
We have to ask that question. That's right.
Deeper. It's deeper.
That's right. That's right. And that's what I think in that moment, that's what happened, where I just decided that for the things that I was going to spend my life doing, whether it was when I was leading soldiers in combat in Afghanistan, or whether when I started a business, a successful business in Baltimore that was focused exclusively on helping first generation students and first and family students make it to and through college, or whether it was running one of the largest, nonprofit organizations in this country, that the centering force, my tethering was going to be on how are we going to fix systems so we do not continually rely on individual successes to help us go to bed at night.
Wow. And that's deep. But the question that you proposed when you said, why are we not asking why there's so many starfish on the beach? Like, I don't like people have to really sit and really, unpeel those layers back to really get and find that answer, because that's a deep question. And those are some deep answers that would come from that. So I think people should take that. All my listeners that's listening, like, really sit down and think about, just that question. Why are there so many starfish on the beach? So I think that's an important question. Speaking of your time in London, right? You decided to join the Army while you was there. You served in, I think it was I want to get it right. I don't want to mess this one up, Wes. It was the 82nd Airborne Division.
There you go. Okay. All the way.
Okay, so what spurred your interest to serve?
I think there were two big motivations for me to join the Army. And actually, I first joined when I was 17 years old. In fact, I wasn't old enough to sign the paperwork myself. My mother had to sign it for me. And I always say that after my teenage years, she was more than happy signing that paperwork and send me away. But I think there was two big reasons. One is, they were going to help pay for college, right? And that was very, very helpful. Um, and I think the other big reason, though, was I felt like I had a certain level of commitment where, when I was 13 and I got sent to military school, this was a place that at first, while I hated it, this was a place that actually did help to change my trajectory. And when at that time, when I was getting ready to finish high school, and I was a pretty good ball player coming out of high school. I was getting scholarship offers. I had a dream that one day Syracuse would recruit me, but they didn't need me. Coach Boeheim was like, "No, we're not interested." So I started looking around. I'm thinking about what it is I wanted to do, and the thing that just kept on coming back to was I was like, I like leadership, and I wanted to lead soldiers. I like leading cadets, and now I want to lead soldiers. And so it was very natural for me to say, I think I want to join the Army, because so many of the people I admired, and particularly so many of the men in my life that I admired at that point, these were people who I met through the military school. These are people who wore the uniform, right? So I was like, I think that's what I want to do. And so I joined the Army there. But honestly, Melo, I mean, when I first joined, we weren't a nation of war. Mm. I joined, when I joined, I was an infantryman, and there was Kosovo going on. That wasn't a war for infantrymen.
Right.
And so it was one of these things where I thought, like, I joined the military, we do the training, do that type of thing. But frankly, I had no idea that war would happen so soon, because it was, months after I graduated from college was 9/11. And I saw how quickly we mobilized. I saw how quickly so many of the soldiers who I trained with, so many soldiers I went through airborne training with and advanced camp with and everything else that I went through all my training with, they were now getting ready to head to Afghanistan. And so it just became a very, very different dynamic at that point. And I remember I got the Rhodes Scholarship months before 9/11 happened. And the Army actually had a conversation with many of the Rhodes Scholars. I think there were 3 Rhodes Scholars that year who were in the military, were in the Army. And the Army told us, hey, listen, finish your degree. Don't worry about it. We know where you are. When your time is up, we'll come get you. And I remember I was working in finance in London after I finished up my studies at the Rhodes Scholarship. And I got a phone call from a guy. At that time, his name was Major Mike Fenzel. Now he's 2-star General Mike Fenzel. And he called me up and he's like, how's it going? And I'm sitting there, I'm wearing like my suit and tie, I'm sitting there like in London, with a corporate credit card. And I'm like, it's good. And he said to me, he said, when are you going to join the fight?
Wow.
It was like indicting. It was straight up, because this is a guy, I mean, I had known Mike for years, like we trained together, like he was a mentor of mine, everything. And he was now working on his second deployment. And when he said that to me, Melo, he was like, so when are you going to join the fight? I was like, I mean, he literally left me speechless. And I remember
not to cut you off, when you say that, when are you going to join the fight? Like, elaborate on that. Like, when somebody comes and say, when are you going to join the fight? In those terms, in that sense, what did he mean by when are you going to join the fight?
I'm so glad you asked that, because you're right. He wasn't just talking about, war or whatever like that. His point was just like, so when are you actually going to involve and engage in your life's mission? And like in this idea, when I was telling him about what I was doing, and I was like, it was fine, and it was interesting, and I was learning a lot. But he's like, but this isn't your fight. That's not your fight. That's something you're doing because, it comes easy to you. Mm-hmm. That's not your fight. And this was something where I was like, I trained with them, with these men and women. We went through hardships together. And it's kind of like going through, preseason. And then when the season starts, you're like, I'm that was great, but I'm good.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. So when he said that to me, he was like, when are you going to join the fight? I literally went back and I thought on it for a while, and I prayed on it for a while. And I got back in touch with him, and I was like, I'm in. And so I ended up leaving finance to go back with the 82nd Airborne Division. And then we trained up for a while, and that's when I deployed with the 82nd Airborne Division over to Afghanistan.
Wow. Listen, we got gems coming from this conversation. When are you going to join the fight? That's
When are you
deep.
going to join the fight?
That's deep, and it wasn't about warring and
That's right.
going to fight. It was a deeper meaning behind the word fight
That's right.
and what that really meant. Because
That's
again,
right.
you realize at that point, it took somebody to be stern and be direct with you and to challenge you to say, when are you going to join the fight? To make you realize and think like, damn, you know what? This is my fight. I gotta go do what I gotta do. I've been fighting for this all my life. I'm gonna go do what I have to do. So when are you gonna join the fight is another, soundbite from this episode.
But I got to tell you, Melo, and it's one of these things where, and it's one of the reasons that I have so much respect for how you've always carried yourself.
Appreciate
because whether it is marching and fighting and building around police accountability, or whether it's challenging the issue of the status quo of poverty that we continue to allow within our society, you have always used your voice and been part of the fight.
Absolutely.
And so there's this beautiful thing in this beautiful moment where I think for all of us, where we find ourselves in these moments where we have to challenge ourselves, and where there is this point where it means potentially a compromise of comfort, or it means potentially a compromise of an opportunity, or it means potentially a compromise of an endorsement, or it means potentially a compromise of whatever it is. But it's like, but that question still gets brought up. But are you going to get in the fight?
Right.
And that's meaningful and that matters. And you've always done that.
Well, I appreciate that. I'm still trying to fight. I'm still trying to keep up with my fight at the end of the day. So I appreciate that. Let's change the subject a little bit. Let's talk about your book. You a lot of people know, and I hope they know, and I hope they read your books, because your books is incredible. That you also an extremely accomplished author, right? You have some of the most incredible work out there, including New York, bestseller, The Other Wes Moore, which by the way, I had to really think about that at first when I first heard that. The Other Wes Moore. I started Googling like, damn, okay, I got it. I understood that. Which the book has such a powerful premise behind it, man. And would you mind just breaking it down for anyone in our audience who's not familiar with that one?
Absolutely. So, in fact, it was the day after I received the Rhodes Scholarship. The Baltimore Sun, which is our hometown paper, wrote this article about this local kid who just received this Rhodes Scholarship, and it talked a bit about my childhood and my background. It talked about how literally where 10 years ago I was sitting there with handcuffs on my wrists. 10 years later, I'm now receiving a Rhodes Scholarship to go over to England. And it talks about the journey and what happened over that decade. And at the same time, they were writing a whole series of articles about 4 guys who walked into a jewelry store. And the first 2 walked in with guns. The second 2 walked in with mallets, and they got everybody on the ground. And when they started breaking glass and taking out jewelry and got a little over $400,000 worth of jewelry. And they all 4 then ran out of the store. And one of the people that was in the store that day was a off-duty police officer who was moonlighting as a security guard. And he got up off the ground and he ran outside to see if he could stop the guys from getting away. And when he ran outside, he started kneeling next to cars and vehicles to give himself cover. But he didn't realize that one of the cars that he was kneeling next to was one of the cars that the guys were in. And he was shot at point blank range, and he was killed instantly. And there was a 12-day national manhunt for those 4 guys. And finally, after 12 days, all 4 were caught. And one of the people that the police were looking for, that was eventually captured and tried and convicted and sentenced for the crime, was a guy whose name was also Wes Moore. And the more I learned about him, the more I learned about this crime, the more I learned about this tragedy, the more I realized how much more we had in common than just our names, where we both grew up in single parent households. We both had academic and disciplinary troubles coming up. We both, we were both living around the same area. When he was actually caught, we were around the same age. And I knew that I had questions. He was the only one that could answer them. So one day I just decided to write him a note. and I wrote to him at Jessup Correctional Institution, which you know, but for people listening, it's about 20 miles outside of Baltimore, of Baltimore City. And about a month later, I got a letter back from Jessup from Wes Moore.
Wow.
And that one letter turned to dozens of letters. Those dozens of letters turned to dozens of visits. My friendship with Wes is now going on, almost 2 decades. He's now in year 20 of his life sentence.
Wow.
And the story is really about these two boys and this journey, and what ends up causing this split amongst these two kids that in many ways are just trying to navigate manhood in their own way, but just oftentimes find our pathways pretty unforgiving. And what that looks like when you have this marriage, when you have this combination of societal and personal responsibility, but just more importantly, how thin that line is between our life and somebody else's life.
That book is incredible, and I hope the listeners and my listeners, go and really get my book too, but really get the, really read the other Wes Moore, man, because I just think that, if you was to put your book side by side with my book, it would be almost like my book is like the
That's
prequel
exactly
to what
right.
you're writing. Like it's
Exactly right.
the prequel to your story, the other Wes Moore. So like when I read it, I'm like, oh yeah, like you actually inspired me to want to start writing, even without a close friend of ours, D Watkins. It's like D is like,
Yes.
look, we have to tell the story, but we have to tell it the way that it is. And your book was a reference on how we structured our book and the way that we talk alongside with D Watkins, books as well. So I just want to say thank you, man. Keep writing the way that you're doing. But
Yes,
but
sir.
with that,
Big up to D Watkins too.
absolutely, big up to D Watkins. What initially prompted you to want to write though? Because we talking about writing. What made you want to start writing?
You know what's wild, Melo, is I didn't want to, because I have no background in writing. You know what I mean? Like, I wasn't trained in writing. I didn't go to school for writing. I didn't do any of that stuff. And I have a dear friend, a woman named Terry Williams. And big up to Terry. And she said to me, she was like, and she's like a real writer. She's written like multiple books, right? And she said to me, she said, I think there's a story here. I think there's a book here. I was like, yeah, Terry. I was like, I don't have time to write. I don't want to dig that deeply into Wes's life. I don't want to dig that deeply in my own life. I don't want to share it. But she just knew about my relationship with Wes. And eventually I went to talk to Wes about it. And I remember having the conversation with him, and I'll never forget it. But I went to Wes and I said, someone wants me to write this story. And like without hesitation, he was like, you need to do it. And he said, and then he said, which I won't forget, he said, listen, I've wasted every opportunity that I've ever had. And he said, and if you can do something to help people understand the consequences for their decisions, but also do something to help people understand the neighborhoods that these decisions are being made in, then you should do it. Mm. And that then became the fire and the focus behind the entire initiative, where literally I would wake up early in the morning, wake up at like 5:15, 5:30 every morning. I would just write for a couple hours before going to work. And some days it was flowing. Some days like it was just going. And some days I just sat there and I was like, I got nothing today. But that didn't mean go to bed. That didn't mean, whatever. That meant then you sit there and you wait, and then tomorrow you try again. And it took about 2 years, a little over 2 years to get that first book written. But it was one of these things where Wes's words and Wes's motivation, it just kept sitting with me when he was like, if you can do something to help people understand the consequences of their decisions, but also do something to help people understand the neighborhoods that the decisions are being made in. And that then became everything that I needed to know and everything I needed to keep focusing on in order to actually get it done.
Wow. We have all your books, let me ask you this, have all your books been inspired by your own journey? Or has it been other, things that influence you to, outside of your own journey that influence you to write these books? Well, all your books at that.
Yeah, no, it's a really good question. I would say yes in many ways because the work was a book that I wrote that was almost like my journey into understanding the difference between your occupation and your work. Where your occupation is where you go every day and where you get your paycheck from and all that kind of stuff, right? But your work is when your greatest passions meet the world's greatest needs.
Right.
Right. And so I wrote a book about that was really kind of influenced my journey in that way. Where and then 5 days was really a book that really more so was about the 5 days surrounding the funeral for Freddie Gray here in Baltimore. And I wanted to tell that story really through the eyes of 8 different people, and kind of a wide variety of different people, whether it was, a police officer, a guy named Mark Partee, who grew up in West Baltimore, but who said, I remember where he said to me, he's like, I know that none of my colleagues woke up that morning with homicide in their mind, but I know why, if I say that to a kid in West Baltimore, why he doesn't believe me.
Oh, indeed,
you
absolutely.
know, or whether it's talking to a guy, another person that was followed was a guy named Greg Butler, and Greg Butler was a high school basketball star in Baltimore, but because of a glitch in the school system, ended up losing his scholarship, and so he literally went from basketball star in Baltimore to a young man protesting. And in fact, there's the infamous story that the person who cut the fire hose, as a fire department was trying to put out the fire, one of the fires, that was Greg Butler. And
Yep.
how you go
Yep.
from being a Baltimore star, a basketball star, to literally being the guy who's cutting the fire hose saying, burn it, let it burn down.
Right.
So
Absolutely.
it's like, so watching all these different individuals, these beautiful stories, and how it all collided around that 5 day period. That was really 5 days. But even with that, there was a bit of personal touch to it, because much of the book is actually laced in with a lot of my story and my feelings and reflections about the fact that this was my hometown that was going through so much pain. And at the same time, I found myself where, as much as I felt like, we were fighting for the right things and we were advocating for the change that needed made and all that kind of stuff, I still looked at my existence, and it goes back to what before, I still looked at my existence and felt a real feeling of complicity for
Mm.
the fact that we have so much disparity within our society, and asking the question, am I really doing enough to be able to address it? And so I think in many ways, writing for me has become very, very calming and cathartic. You know what I mean? Like, it's my way of being able to have an uninterrupted conversation with the people, where I can
And
just
with
share my
yourself,
thoughts,
and with yourself too,
and with myself,
and
and
with
with
yourself.
myself. That's
I,
exactly right.
I've experienced that because for the longest I've never wanted to write my book, tell my story, from that perspective of what it was like growing up, because I just felt like we all go through the same thing. What made me different?
Yes.
What made my story different than everybody else? But I also understand on the flip side of that there's people who really need to hear that.
Yes.
So as I'm writing, I'm like, okay, but I really got to give it to you the way that I'm sitting down. If I went back to Myrtle Avenue today and sat down and had a conversation with you, this is how I would be talking to you. This would be our dialogue, and that's what I've learned about writing that book and just that process. It's very therapeutic. That was my first time actually doing it, but you learn a lot about just stories and time and history and things like that. But you also learn a lot about yourself because you're on the outside, looking in at that point.
And that's
Um,
the thing. And that's the thing. If you didn't go through that process, you probably would have never gone through that process.
oh, for sure, never,
You would have never
never.
sat down and actually thought about your life in a sense of reflection, or said, you know what, let me really take a moment and think about these years or these moments or these people. Because life moves so fast for people.
Mm,
And they never take the time to actually slow it down a little bit and pause. And it's the beauty of the process you just went through, is you actually forced yourself to do something that every single person should do in some way, shape, or form. And it's
absolutely.
beautiful.
And it took me 20 something years
Mm,
to come to this point to say I'm ready to talk about that story
Yeah.
and feel good about it. You know, I feel good
Yeah.
about it. I'm excited about that.
That's
Before we move on, I definitely want to talk about your time as CEO of Robinhood. You were the CEO of it was the organization from 2017 up until I want to say this past
yeah.
May,
A few months
and
ago.
and yeah, and accomplished an unbelievable amount. Like you personally, I want to say you personally raised 650 million, and oversaw. I really want to like put light on this. What I'm about to say. You really raised $650 million, and you oversaw the coronavirus relief efforts and launched new initiatives like the Power Fund, which was major. Congrats to that.
Thank you.
How did your own upbringing, influence your interest in working for like that organization? I know you said public safety and that was your thing back in the day, but how did that influence like your interest in working for that organization?
Yeah. Well, it's funny when they first came to me and they're like, "We'd like for you to be the CEO of Robin," and I just finished having a successful exit for an enterprise that I was running, and I first said to them, I was like, "I don't think this makes sense to me," because I was like, "Y'all are based in New York," and I was like, "And I'm a Baltimorean, I'm a Marylander, and I'm not moving." And I was like, second thing is I was enjoying what I'm doing, and the third thing I was like, I've been pretty critical of philanthropy in the past. And they're like, yeah, it's all over YouTube. We've seen it. And but that's actually one of the reasons why we want to come talk to you is that we think a lot of what you're saying isn't wrong. And really the approach that I wanted to take to the work was to say, it'll never be good enough if we just simply rely on our ability to give money, right? Where I'm really proud of the fact that, during our time, we allocated close to $750 million in education and housing and food insecurity and all those type of things, that we were able to distribute over $80 million just in relief, just in COVID funds. And that was like cash assistance, food assistance, making sure the people that were intentionally left out of cash assistance were actually getting the assistance that they needed, that we built a policy way, because we're able to address the structural and systemic issues, to include things like adjustments to the child tax credit, that we were able to create the Power Fund, which was allocating capital around $18 million exclusively to organizations that were led by people of color. Because organizations led by people of color, particularly organizations led by Black folks, were intentionally left out of the funding dynamic. But the thing that I also realized in that whole larger dynamic, though, was, it was this. And this was really the push where, after 5 really successful years at Robinhood, that I decided to come back and run for governor of Maryland, was, it was like that my birth state, the place, my hometown, it was so representative of so many of the joys and so many of the sorrows that I saw within our society, that, that we had these amazing opportunities that we were able to delve into and fund and support. But there are also these remarkable inequalities and inequities, where how do you have the best schools in the country that are sitting side by side to some of the most underfunded and underperforming? How do you have hospitals that literally people can come from around the world to go get treatments in, but people in the state, they can't afford to get treated in it?
Right.
And so really, I think the Robinhood experience was really powerful, because I felt like, we were doing such good work, and we were moving at a pace and at a clip that the organization had never moved in before. But it also was a distinct reminder that good deeds alone will never lead you out of darkness. And that if you are not actually focusing on the systems that's creating the fact that we do have that 24% of people who lost their jobs due to COVID-19 were people who were living in poverty before COVID-19, i.e. the working poor, right? If you aren't actually addressing the systems that created the fact that around 60% of high school freshmen in Baltimore City were chronically absent during the COVID years. They missed 30% or more of the school year. if you aren't addressing the fact that we watched people who were in jobs and we watched 11 years of job growth go away in 11 weeks, there's no philanthropy that's going to fix that.
Right.
And until we understand that, then we will repeatedly just find ourselves cleaning up the debris that comes from broken systems. We'll repeatedly find ourselves picking up the starfish.
Which I was just about to say that. Why? Which brings it back full circle. Why there's so many starfish?
Why are there so many
on the beach? So it's great that you just tied that in. And for the listeners who's listening, who may not be familiar with the Robinhood, Robinhood is the largest. I want to say this, the largest poverty fighting nonprofit organization in New York. So I just wanted to bring a light to that. And
when I became CEO, we started funding outside of New York, and it was really because it was highlighting the fact that poverty is not a New York issue alone. And in fact, we launched something called Mobility Labs, which focused on addressing economic mobility in urban, rural, and suburban areas. The first place we invested in outside of New York,
Baltimore. Absolutely. Absolutely. I was waiting for you to touch on that a little bit. I wanted you to bring it up, not me. I wanted you to bring that up.
It wasn't an accident. It wasn't an accident.
Of course not.
It
shouldn't be. Absolutely not. Let's bring it back to kind of what you're focused on. So we'll switch gears a little bit before we close out. Like we definitely have to talk about your candidacy. Like we have to. And congratulations with that. I know that was a major announcement. It's another major step that you would be taking in your life. But I feel like you've done the work already. You know, you've fought the fight, before, so you understand, the ins and outs and what it's going to take to lead. It's not going to be easy, but you understand what it takes. You announced in June that you will be running for governor of Maryland. What made you want to pursue, in life and politics?
Yeah, I think the thing that really made me want to pursue it is looking at the situation that we find ourselves in now, that we really do find ourselves at a breaking point. We find ourselves at a larger breaking point when we see how the inequity just continues to show itself in what is one of the wealthiest states of this country. And it's also one of the most unequal. Where if you look at, for example, Raj Chetty is a professor at Harvard University, did a 20-year longitudinal study for if you happen to be a young Black male who was born into poverty, where were the best places and the worst places in the country for you to have the chance to not die in poverty? Two of the best places in this country were in the state of Maryland. The worst place in this country was also in the state of Maryland.
Absolutely.
When we look at the dynamics that are existing in urban and rural and suburban environments within the state and the challenge of economic inequity that exists, that the thing that made me say, I'm going to run for governor, and not only are we going to win, we're going to change the dynamics of it, is that how do we actually create mechanisms of economic opportunity, measurements of work and wages and wealth that everybody can benefit from? Because we know that what we saw during this time of COVID-19 was not just an exacerbation, it was an exposure. It was an exposure of the fact that so many of these economic systems that are in place are systems that were flawed and actively working against people for them to have an opportunity. And whether you're talking about in Allegheny County or in Frederick County, whether you're over in Western Maryland, whether you're talking about Somerset County or Dorchester County in the Eastern Shore, whether you're talking about Baltimore City or Baltimore County, or whether you're talking about Prince George's County or Calvert County, that we have down in Southern Maryland, that there are dynamics that exist within our state. That is a state of 6.2 million people in one of the most affluent states in the country. But at the same time, we know that we will not succeed and we will not grow if all of us are not growing.
Absolutely.
And so my focus was saying, how do we take a very unique lane and a very unique lens on this, for the fact that, I was like, I've had a chance to lead in every sector of our economy, whether it's leading soldiers, whether it's running a business, whether it's running, as you said, one of the largest nonprofits in this country. I've had a chance to lead throughout these various sectors. And I know that if we are not willing to be bold and if we're not willing to be future facing in the way we're talking about these issues, then we will continue having the same problems. And there was this, this dynamic in the military that, we always talk about this idea that we don't leave people behind. We don't leave people behind ever. In our missions, we do not leave anybody behind. And the thing that I want to push forward in our race, in our campaign, is saying, and our state shouldn't either. We should not be a place that's leaving people behind.
And that goes back to your resume and the work that you put in from day one, right? And that's a military mindset. That's the mantra. That's the brotherhood. That's what keep everybody together for life. No one gets left behind. And I think that message, I think that message will resonate with people in Maryland, in particular Baltimore City. I only can speak for Baltimore City because we need that. We need that hope. We need somebody that's behind us and saying, "Look, I got y'all. Like this, I need to hear y'all. Like talk to me." And yes. I think because a lot of times we the voiceless, and we're afraid to, or we don't have the opportunity to tell what we want to tell and talk the way that we want to talk and have those real, organic, natural conversations that people listen to us. Like you said, we are a powerful state. Yes. But a lot of times it get overshadowed by a lot of the other things that goes on, especially in Baltimore City in particular. So I'm sure that message will touch home when you start talking about the Baltimoreans, and I can vouch for that coming from the city.
Yes,
so
before
we kind of close out, I just want to say, man, I sincerely appreciate you being on here, man. But before I let you go, though, I want to bring it back to kind of what's in your glass a little bit and have a few quick fire questions for you to close us out. The people and I have to know what's in your glass on some special occasions. I'm talking slow because I really want you to process the questions that I'm going to ask you. When you're on a vacation, what is your go-to? What's in your glass?
When I'm on vacation, my go-to is gonna be Jamaican rum.
Oh, okay.
I'm gonna
I like Puerto Rican rum, but it's
Puerto Rican rum is good too. Puerto Rican rum is good too. But because and I say because much of my family is Jamaican, so
absolutely.
So when I'm on vacation, I'm hanging out with family.
Indeed.
I done had red nephew.
Listen, I done had it. I done had the Jamaican rum. I know what type of time it is with that. when you're out to dinner at a nice restaurant, what's in your glass?
When I'm out to dinner, you know what's in my glass? I love a good Pinot Noir.
Oh, never fail you.
I love a good Pinot Noir because when I think about, I mean, there's, I love cabs and I love wines of all forms, but I feel like Pinot Noir is the type of wine, and a good Pinot is the type of wine that no matter what your meal is, no matter who the crowd or the environment is, no matter how early or late at night it is, Pinot is always a good choice. It is just to stay steady and to stay steady consistent.
I'm glad you said that. I appreciate that. You celebrating a big win, be that in business, and publishing, New York Times bestseller, like you've done multiple times over, or any aspect of your life. You're celebrating a big win. You're celebrating becoming the governor of Maryland. What's your go-to? What's in your glass?
I think if I'm celebrating a big win, it's actually going to be two different things. One is I'm gonna have a nice rye, and because I think when you think about ryes are just like the kind of, it's the kind of drink that it is both the perfect settling and the perfect moment of reflection drink.
Mm.
And so I'm gonna go with a good rye. But when I'm celebrating too, I know that I'll be drinking a nice rye, but I also know I'm gonna have a nice cigar with me too.
Oh, for sure. You gotta have that. You have to
Yeah.
have. It's a must. It's
So
a must.
that's gonna those two things are gonna have to complement each other. One for one hand, one for the other hand.
And that's the celebration for you right there.
Yes,
Man,
sir.
thank you so much, Wes, man, and for joining me and best of luck with everything you have going on right now.
Thank you.
I'll be the first one to tell you during this whole process and this journey, I'm here for you. You know, I have your back. We can always talk.
Thank
You know, you can find me. We can sit down and talk. Let's keep the conversation going. Let's keep the dialogue going because, like you said earlier, it's bigger than you. It's bigger than me. It's
Yes,
about
sir.
everybody, and no man gets left behind. So I want to say thank you for that, for jumping on what's in your glass. Cheers. Big shout
Cheers,
out to the
brother.
wineries in Maryland. I'm gonna be checking you guys out. I need to figure this out. We need to figure something out. But I appreciate you guys. Thanks again, man. And always, my brother. Peace.
Peace. God bless you, brother. Keep leading. Keep leading.
Indeed. Indeed.
Appreciate it.
Thank you. All right.
Thanks, man.